Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young lawyers in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm Emil Ovbiagele.
And I'm Kristen Hardy, and we're your hosts. This is the Bottom Up Podcast. How are you doing, Emil? You just came back from Dubai.
Yep.
How was that?
Everyone needs to go to Dubai. Mm-hmm. It was luxury like I've never seen, but it wasn't a luxury that got to me. It was the vision. So Dubai in the United Arab Emirates is a country that's very oil dependent. Mm-hmm. And you dig deeper and you realize all of the big buildings that we see today and the tourism industry that has developed, that they've been able to develop, was all out of fear. The idea and fear that one day they might run out of oil. And 30 years ago or so, yes, it's an autocratic regime, but I don't care about the politics of it. The leaders in that country decided that we got to make some tough decisions. So you now have a tourism mecca in the middle of one of the more religious, I would say, conservative parts of the world. And it was so beautiful to see different people from all walks of lives. I didn't feel restricted. I know some folks think or have this perception of what it might be, and I urge people to kind of explore that a little bit because it's not what a lot of people imagine it being. I went with my wife. We didn't feel like there were in places we couldn't go to. In general, just be respectful, right? I mean, when I ask people like, oh yeah, why are you so scared? Why are you asking me that question about like, how was Dubai? Were you allowed to do this? And then it usually goes into like, well, I heard it's all about what you wear, and that you may have the morality police. And like, first, I didn't see no morality police there. That's one. Two, and I'm like, I mean, as long as you're not like wearing a bikini on the highway, which will be problematic in America,
with that, Emil.
Or being shirtless in the middle of a mosque, because it's all about being, just kind of understanding your environment. And
that's true.
And knowing, within reason. If you were to do things reasonably, I didn't see any issues.
I went to Dubai about a decade ago, and I did see the morality police. I mostly agree with you, though. Like, be respectful in any country, understand the customs. You're going to someone else's place. Easy peasy, right? So yeah. I have no problem following anybody's rules or customs. But we were in the hotel, and we stayed at the Atlantis. And the Atlantis has this huge water park in the back of it. And we were walking through with cover-ups. We had on bikinis, but cover-ups to go to, it's the water park.
Yeah.
And someone came and said, walk out, walk around. And they made us a walk around. We could not walk through the lobby. So from then on, we were kind of nervous about what we would wear. We went to Old Dubai with some people who lived there. And we wore long pants. One of us had on shorts, and they were long shorts. And they were like, you cannot walk through with those long shorts. So they gave her a cover-up for her to cover her legs. And again, it's respect in that country. Yeah. You have to understand it's a Muslim country.
And that was 10 years ago, too.
That's 10 years ago. Absolutely.
That's fair. So I stayed in part of my trip, I stayed at the Burj Al Arab, with the big hotel there. And then the other part, I stayed at a hotel called Five Seasons or 5 Star, I can't remember. But it was on the beach. And it was no different than a Vegas pool party. And I was even shocked. And yeah, let's just leave it at that. Yeah. So it seems like a lot has changed. Yeah. And I think, but what I love about that is a country or a set of individuals making very deliberate choices, right? Making certain compromises for the good of all. Now, I also found out an interesting fact. 25%, and I think you guys would appreciate this, 25% of all active cranes in the world are active in Dubai. That's how much construction's going on in there. It's wild. I saw buildings that shouldn't stand the way they should. It was just wow. The wow factor was out of this world, so highly recommend it.
It's a beautiful place. The trip looked beautiful. Nat and I were talking about purses while she was there. So I'm glad you guys had a good time. But that tees us up very nicely for today's episode.
Yes.
Because we are talking about the road less traveled and then building something yourself, your own career path. So I am so excited to welcome Larry Whitley. He is a real estate attorney at Northwestern Mutual, and I want to give him an opportunity to introduce himself.
Woo woo.
First off, really just thank you both for having me. You guys were 3Ls when I was a 1L, and I really can't express the level of inspiration, motivation, and really comfort that I got just seeing you guys walk in the halls. It let me know that it was possible seeing you guys headed to graduation. So have always respected you. And it's just a really cool moment just to sort of sit down with you for a little bit and talk about my story. And
It's awesome, man.
Yeah, thank
Happy
you.
to have you.
so a little bit about me. Born and raised in Milwaukee. Proud product of the Milwaukee public school system. Rufus King is where I went to high school. Stayed local for undergrad, where I attended Marquette for undergrad, studied business. Took a year off, worked for a professional sports team and sales. And it was really that internship or that position that really exposed me to the idea of law school. There was actually a kid named Sean Brown who was interning in the law department at that organization, and he exposed me to what he was doing and talking about how he was at Marquette. And
Sean was in our class, right?
He was.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So just seeing Sean as an example of a black man in law school pursuing that road, it gave me the confidence to go ahead and apply. So then decided to go to Marquette Law. In my opinion, they kind of push you in two different areas in terms of the litigation route or the transactional route. Felt that the transactional route was more in line with, I think, my personality and my interests, especially given just my undergrad in business, right? And so then I decided to pursue internships that were more transactional in nature. So the first summer, spent that at a private equity firm.
Mm-hmm.
Then the second summer at a large life insurance company that had a sophisticated investment portfolio. And really the rest is history.
Larry's being very modest. He's a rock star, right?
Yeah.
Like, you've done amazing things. I imagine you were doing amazing things before I knew you in college, but then since as a young lawyer. So
Well, you didn't know Larry in college. I knew Larry.
yes,
in
you did.
college.
That's true. You did.
You knew him in law school. Larry and I actually we were in the same class in undergrad at Marquette. One of the only, like, probably, what were we, like 10 black people?
10, yeah, definitely.
10 dudes. I'm just joking. It was a little more than that. It was like, I think it was like, but there weren't a lot back then, right? And so it was, and that explains the absence, because actually I think I found that later on when you were in law school that you took about a year off to go work. So we had lots of good times in undergrad together.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I remember this.
We don't need your bro stories, but back to the podcast. So, Larry, tell us a little bit about, I want to talk about your journey because, again, on theme with this podcast or this episode is the road less traveled. And when I mean the road less traveled, I mean you get into law school and they usually give you two different paths to take. You're a litigator or you work in transactional work. Maybe you work for the government or perhaps you work in private practice. But there are a lot of different things you can do with your law degree. There are a lot of different paths you can take. I've talked on this podcast about my non-traditional path. It's not non-conventional. I guess it's more so just different. It's not what everyone is normally doing. So Larry, can you tell us a little bit about your path from law school to starting the practice of law?
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Sure. So in law school, like you mentioned, they really push you into two different directions, the litigation route or the transactional route. And I really felt that the transactional route was more in line with my interests and my background, just having studied business in undergrad. And so then I really sought out opportunities in that area. My first summer, I was at a private equity firm, which was more SEC-related stuff. And then my second summer, I was at a company where they had 9 different practice teams, and that really allowed me to just see different areas of the law, including transactional law. It was actually during that internship where I fell in love with real estate. I was attending what we call a deal review, where people were sitting around like a conference table and we're breaking down a transaction. And just me watching the interactions between the architect and the attorneys and the environmentalists, I saw myself in that attorney in that room, really. There was something about taking documents, and at the end of it, it was something tangible. Mm-hmm. So, negotiating these various documents from origination to closing, and at the end result is a property, right? A multifamily building or a mall or whatever the case may be. So that was just a very cool internship. Which ultimately turned into an offer. And so the question I sometimes get is why? Why did you go straight from law school in-house? Because as we know, that is not sort of the traditional path.
Yeah.
And I can tell you why. I've always had a deep sense of who I am and who I'm not. I did the work early to figure out what my core values were and what type of situation I wanted to be in. And I've always had the ability really to block out external noise. In law school, there's a lot of noise where people kind of tell you, oh, you got to land that big law job your first summer, or you got to do this, you got to take this class, or my grades are this, or my grades are that. And I think having the ability to block out the noise has always been one of my strong suits. And so when you strip away the idea of going into big law or in-house or government or whatever the case may be, I think the most important thing you can do as someone entering a profession is get training, right? And so that was my number one thing. Where can I go where they'll teach me how to be a lawyer? Being a first generation, everything, and not knowing any attorneys growing up, I needed to see what that actually looked like to be a practicing attorney. And so through my internship, really got around really good people who I could tell took a genuine interest in me and my story and wanted me to succeed. And so when the opportunity presented itself, honestly, to convert my internship into a full-time position, it made all the sense in the world because when I met with the boss, she had a very specific plan and training program for my development. And like I mentioned, that was my number one thing was, can I get the proper training to be a good attorney when push comes to shove?
So we talked a little bit earlier about how you are a rock star because, again, even though it's not common for people to go straight from intern to in-house, it's not common at the company in general. It's been done very, very few times. So you said you had that opportunity to get training, and that's why you ultimately landed there. But why you? Why do you think the company decided to bet on Larry Whitley in particular to take on this role?
I think the common theme has always been people that have taken a genuine interest in me and what I'm about. So over the course of that internship, the right people gravitated towards me and wanted to see me succeed. And then I think me being proactive, being professionally assertive in what I wanted and what I was interested in, and then obviously a little bit of luck too. I think all those things played a role in me being sort of given that opportunity.
I relate to going straight in-house because I did something similar. Actually, my path was a bit more rocky, starting in a non-traditional role and then eventually moving in-house after a year or two. There's pros and cons. Can you talk about some of those challenges with starting in-house instead of private practice?
The earliest challenge I would say for me was the fact that they hadn't really done this in a while. And so they needed to figure out where to house me, who would be my primary mentor, what kind of repetition would they give me on deal flow, what was the proper level that I should be coming into these deals. Those are all the things that I think were probably challenges for me early on. And then also me learning how to navigate these spaces, me being one of the youngest people in the department, and when I want to go to a happy hour or something like that, most of them have to go home, and then not even really having any peers that were also practicing in the same arena as me to bounce ideas off of and things like that. It was extremely challenging, if I'm honest.
So basically a sense of isolation due to the way you got there, right? Not a lot of peers, hadn't been done in a while, and you're a new lawyer.
Yeah, you're trying to figure out okay, how do I show up each and every day? What's acceptable? You're trying to learn the rules of engagement for that organization, and it's extremely challenging, I think, early on.
Now, as you're going through this, this challenge with the isolation that we talked about, at any point in time, did you confront a sense of, hey, am I worth it? Am I worth it? A sense of imposter syndrome? Because isolation usually leads to that.
So I do have a quick story. So again, everything that I say is really in the context of a transactional attorney that works on deals. So each and every real estate deal, like I mentioned, we have a review of the deal where we discuss the pros and cons of the deals, we assess risk, and we provide recommendations, right? So this was probably my first or second month of practice, and I was shadowing a more senior attorney on a deal. And so we go over to the meeting and imagine a conference table where the various individuals that are involved in a deal are sitting at the table, and the attorney sits down, architect sits down. For whatever reason, I grab a chair from the conference table and I drag it into the corner and I sit in the corner. So after the meeting, the meeting goes fine, everything's fine. After the meeting, the attorney pulls me to the side and says, "Don't ever do that again." She said, "You belong at the table." Mm-hmm. And I really can't tell you how impactful that was for me in my journey, because I kept questioning, well, one, I don't know anything about the law yet. Two, I'm the youngest person in the department. I'm one of the only black people in the whole department, and so I was just questioning myself a lot and asking, why me, why am I here, and things like that. But just having someone that's more senior than you and more accomplished saying you belong at the table, that changed the whole thing for me.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great story. It's so funny. I think yesterday I was having a conversation with Sarah Martis, the executive director of the Milwaukee Bar Association, and And she had said, Emil, you always say, you're not into faking it until you're making it. But I always, and she was like, we had this debate about what that is. It's like, well, I think you should portray a sense of confidence. I'm like, no, I'm a huge believer of not faking it until you're making it, but you always act like you belong. Mm-hmm. And those are two different things. And because like similarly, I mean, with that story, that context, right? So you are getting that sense of belonging, but you're still aware of the fact that there's a lot of learning to be done. I'm at this table, I'm not there yet, but I belong at this table. And I think that's powerful.
What helped me early on was saying, you know what, it's a strength that I don't know anything, right? Mm-hmm. And that might sound silly to some people, but really it allowed me to provide them with a fresh perspective and fresh look on our deals. Where are we using the right provisions? Like, why is that in the contract? I think those kind of things and my natural curiosity actually ended up being sort of my way to contribute early on.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Who better to trust when you're facing a malpractice claim than Wilmick? With their Wisconsin licensed claims attorneys and strong network of defense counsel, find peace of mind with Wilmick, supporting and partnering with Wisconsin law firms since 1986.
And I think it's something important that you just hit on, Emil. It's not an act. You're not acting like you belong. You do belong. So that's not the same to me as faking it. You do belong at the table. Mm-hmm. And that's a powerful story, Larry, because, I think about it literally and figuratively. Like we do, as a young attorneys, as Black attorneys, we do, as women attorneys, belong at the table. And it's good that you need people around you that sometimes confirm that.
No, for sure. And now where I'm at is really, not only do I belong, but I need to keep taking up more space. With time and experience, that's been the main thing that's changed for me is how can I take up more space? How can I use my voice to impact change?
Touched on it just a little bit, but you're a proud product of NPS. I always say it's so important. We're talking about attracting and retaining attorneys who come to school here, but more so attorneys who are homegrown here, born and raised. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how high school was so impactful for you in your journey.
Yeah, like I mentioned, born and raised on the north side of Milwaukee. My mom was a Milwaukee public school nurse for 26 years. My dad, when he was alive, was a school bus driver. My mom had always emphasized the importance of education. And she didn't always have all the answers, but she knew she could find the people that did. And so really, not only am I a product of the Milwaukee public school system, but I'm a product of the community. I'm a product of all the community-facing organizations that poured into me over the years. And yeah, King was awesome. Again, my mom fought to get me into the quote unquote, best schools in NPS. And so I went to Samuel Morse Middle School, which was a feeder school to Rufus King High School. And they're just around a lot of talented and diverse kids that were also motivated. And it's playing out right now where I'm seeing a lot of them are lawyers, doctors, entrepreneurs, and things like that. So very grateful of my upbringing and the adversity that I faced and everything along those lines because it really shaped me into who I am today. But, the coolest job that I've ever had when I was growing up was I was a ball boy for the Milwaukee Bucks. And that was just such a cool experience. And it really, really showed me at a young age how to be professional because I was working really closely with the players and I learned early about confidentiality and all sorts of things. And so I always mention that because this was one of the earliest and coolest jobs I've ever had.
I know you're a sports guy. You love. So Marquette, got to be Marquette basketball, the Bucks. Who else are you going for?
That's really the Bucks and Marquette. At Marquette, I was actually a manager for the Marquette men's basketball team. Guys like Jimmy Butler, Jarrell McNeil, Wes Matthews, etc. So definitely Bucks, Golden Eagles, and then I'm a big boxing fan too. It just so happens that quite a few of my friends ended up turning professional in boxing. So I've always kept a close eye on that as well.
Very cool. So you talked about being not just a product of your parents, a product of your community. How do you give back to your community now? I know you are super busy, but you have your hands involved in a lot of different things. So tell us a little bit about that.
So right now, my day job, as I mentioned, is I'm a transactional attorney at a large company, really advising them on their real estate portfolio. We have a portfolio of over $60 billion and it ranges in all types of asset classes. But the reason I mention that, honestly, is because it's through my day job where I've acquired the skill set and the credibility, I think, that allows me to have an even bigger voice in my community. And so right now, internally here, even at the organization, I am sort of assisting the company as they figure out how they can be a better partner to the community to help, neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested in. And then externally, again, trying to use that skill set, the legal training that I received to figure out how I can use that skill set to help a couple of different organizations. And so I do sit on the board of 2 different organizations in Milwaukee, one being a newer organization called Fit Club MKE, and then the other is a more established community center known as the Neighborhood House. And so my mom from an early age told me, to whom much is given, much is required. And that's been something that has always stuck with me. I really feel an obligation to give back because of all the people that have poured into me when I was coming up.
Speaking of that, companies have taken a hard look at their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices, and your company is doing the same thing, much of the same thing. But I think something really cool that it has done is set up this task force specifically looking at its Black employees, its Black talent, and being committed to changing practices or bolstering practices for the greater good of equity, racial equity. So can you tell us a little bit about that work? I know you've been involved.
Yeah, so I've actually been, there's 4 different outcomes that I believe that the task force is trying to drive. I won't pretend to know all the ins and outs of each pillar or outcome, but I am, as I mentioned, really involved in the partnership and community aspect of things, where we're looking at how can the organization leverage its resources to be a better partner to community-facing organizations. And so what does that mean for me? It really is twofold. One is I try to use my lens and perspective as a kid from the north side of Milwaukee, give them perspective. And then 2, really I try to use my skill set as a transactional attorney to assess risk, evaluate deals, and then ultimately help them paper them. And honestly, it's been a cool experience just because a lot of companies talk about it and chase headlines and things like that. But the folks that I'm really working with, side by side, collaborating with, it's genuine. And so that's really refreshing.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
State Bar of Wisconsin members have access to affordable insurance plans, including term life, accident, critical illness, and accidental death and dismemberment. Coverage is issued by the Prudential Insurance Company of America. For more information, visit wisbar.memberenroll.com.
Talk to us a little bit about your involvement with law students. We talk about that give back aspect. I know you are involved with a clerkship committee at your company, and then also I'm sure you do a lot of mentoring of up and coming law students. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think as a first generation college student and someone that's really trying to pave a new way, it can be incredibly difficult to figure out the answers and which way to go. And so to the extent I can provide someone with the answer, or at least my perspective on something, the better. And so I try to be a voice as much as possible, whether it's having coffees with students or whether it's just doing things on my podcast or wherever else is what I try to do.
The podcast, tell us a little bit more about that. I had the opportunity to be a guest on the podcast, and it was really, really cool. So I want to give you the space to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. The podcast is called Scholarships. I co-hosted with a friend of mine who's also an attorney in the Chicago area. And really, there's really 2 reasons why we started the podcast. One, I would say, is we wanted to provide a platform to those who have bettered their situation via academics. Growing up where I grew up, a lot of people place an emphasis on those who have achieved through sports or entertainment. And I thought, why not, try to create that space for people that have used academics as the way out. That was really the first reason. And then the second, was more so around mentorship and inspiration. I found and drew so much inspiration from people's stories, and I knew that storytelling could be a way for people to learn. And so obviously we had Kristen on the show and left that episode inspired and learned a lot, and hoping to do more of that in the future, hopefully with Emil and others.
I ain't got an invite yet.
No, you're on the list. You're on the list. You're on the list.
I want to pick up on something you just said here and share a personal story as well. So one of the things I do like about your podcast is this idea of making academics and education cool and reemphasizing that for a lot of people it is the way, right? And I see a lot of the debates going on about college affordability and how, and people down talking college to a large extent. And I think in that narrative, there's also a sense of privilege with the people having that conversation. Mm-hmm. It's a class of people who have never had, where they've never had to struggle with the lack of opportunities to get educated. And it's like, hey, you know what? We're post-education now. And it's been so cool to see that as an emphasis of your show, because as, yes, I'm a black person in America, but I also grew up in Nigeria. I have a slightly different background. And I remember people would always ask me, hey, what sports did you play in high school? And it's so odd because in most Western African countries and most African countries, there is an emphasis. The jocks and the cool girls and cool guys in high school were the smart ones. And it was such a turnaround. And I think this is something that plays into American society in general. And I think that you doing that is so powerful and so inspiring as, hey, I'm not saying it's the way out, but it doesn't get glamorized enough. And I think especially in today's context where I think there is an attack on formal education. And I'm not using the word attack in a pejorative sense. I do think there's some aspects of formal education as we educate people needs to be looked at. But what's the place of your podcast and your voice in the current terrain that seems to be very anti-education?
This might not be directly on point with the question, but, really.
I talked a lot there.
For me, exposure is everything, right? And so I just think you can't dream it if you can't see it. And a lot of times in communities where I come from, people are focused on the quick wins, right? And it's hard for them to see what the long game looks like. And so the podcast is really to say, hey, like, we just talked to a black woman attorney at a Fortune 90 company, or we just talked to a doctor, and these are things that are possible for you too if you're willing to put the work in and things of that nature. So really emphasizing the long game is really the intent of the pod.
Now, I listen to the podcast too, and I think another fascinating aspect of it is your intended audience. Your intended audience, I would say on a macro level, are younger black people. On a micro level, younger black people in Milwaukee. I think the first 6 or 7 guests you had were professionals who were all products of MPS, and you made that known, and it was such a thing, which I thought was quite well done. Was that an intentional choice?
Oh, it was definitely intentional. Again, back to the exposure piece. I wanted kids to see that yes, you can go to Milwaukee Public Schools and be successful. I tell people here all the time, the difference between me and a lot of my peers growing up, it's not intellect, it's circumstance, right? And so I had a mother that was very intentional about trying, to steer me in the right direction.
When we talked on your podcast, I'm from Detroit, and I did not go to a Detroit public school, but that I agree with that. It's a circumstance. It's not intellect. That's not the driver. That's not the difference. It truly is circumstance. I had a mother who was hell-bent on whatever I have to do for my kids to not go to the school that I went to in that neighborhood, but go to the school. They literally are on opposite sides. Like one is this way, one is that way. The private school is this way and the public school is this way for elementary school. And that made all the difference because all those kids, which it was a predominantly black Catholic school, but all of those children are doing great things. Everyone that I was in my class, it's a bunch of doctors and lawyers and real estate moguls and developers. And those are the kids that I went to school with in the city of Detroit. So I totally agree with you. It's really just that, and that's about circumstance. It doesn't mean that if you were at the public school, my mother, my father, they went to public schools. They're some of the smartest people I know. So yeah, I love that you talk about that. You talk about shifting the narrative with the podcast and also the narrative of Milwaukee. There's so much Milwaukee bashing. And I hear this from people who have not lived in Milwaukee in 15 years. And it's, I can't move back to Milwaukee. And it's like, but why not? Because there's so many professionals who come here and choose to live here, choose to stay here, choose to work here. And you have to be that change that you want to see. Yeah. And if you're doing that, you're literally doing that with the real estate projects that you work on and you just being a professional here that people can look to. I think it's good on that wide, grander scale because you can't touch every person and child, throughout the city of Milwaukee or throughout the country to say, hey, this is a cool place. Come visit. We got great things going on here. But the podcast can have a longer reach compared to you or me or Emil as just a couple of people.
And now, a word from our sponsors. What? You don't have an Ultimate Pass yet? Oh, that's a mistake. Find out why at wisbar.org/ultimatepass.
And I've been very bullish of late about Milwaukee. Like not of late, but I most of my extended family members in the States don't live anywhere close to the Midwest, right? They're on the coast, the East Coast, or now everyone's in Texas or Georgia or Atlanta, right? And every now and then when they come visit, they're all surprised. And I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, where it's kind of flattering, but it's like really?
Why are you surprised?
You really thought of us?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things going on, and I'm very bullish about the city, and I tell people this: it's the city where, where my dreams came true. And I came to the city as a 16-year-old, teenager from Nigeria, and I've been able to carve out a little piece of my own experience here, carve out my life here, and one thing I think Milwaukee has going for it, and I think you highlight this with the guests that you have on your show, Larry, is you can create your dreams and your experiences. I'm not saying you can't do that on the coast with the bigger cities, but I feel like there is just you don't get that time to take a step back, because New York is New York. LA is LA, right? You kind of almost feel like there's just so much going on that you either have to fit in or you don't. And in Milwaukee, there's something for everyone. If you're a foodie, you can be a foodie. If you want to be an outdoors person, you can do that. If you're into sports, you can do that. And I think that is such an underutilized, or at least underrealized value that a city has. Now at a moderate cost compared to Chicago. And if you really crave the big city feeling, we've got Chicago about an hour away. So enough of the whole Milwaukee loving.
Yeah. I'm curious what you say, because people give me this question, or students pose this question to me all the time. But a student comes to you and say, hey, I worked at the firm my first summer, didn't like it. I think I want to go the in-house route. What is the advice that you give them, or not even just advice how to get there, but advice generally about going in-house fresh out of law school?
I think you, again, have to figure out, what your core values are, and then also what you're trying to accomplish. And I think you can't look at just the name of a company or an organization and then make assumptions about it. I think you really got to, ask the right questions to figure out what the program and system really looks like at that institution. What's the interaction between the attorneys and the business folks? How is the law department valued, right? Is the work being primarily done by the in-house counsel, or are they managing outside counsel, which is a stereotype, I think, of in-house counsel, right? So really get
you guys work?
Here you go.
but that's my point. Like, people make so many assumptions.
I'm joking, by the way.
No, but it's like the number one thing that I get, man. I'm telling you, when people are drilling down on my resume and who I am and things like that. So where'd you start? And I'm like, I started here at the same company.
You started in the burbs. You were never in the ghetto.
No, but the thing,
practicing law in the private setting. I'm joking.
No, but to my point about really understanding the system and the program here at the company that I'm at, it was clear to me that we were actually operating more like a mid-sized law firm. All of my deals I handle on my own, from origination to closing. Don't get me wrong, every now and then there might be some local issue that I'm just not keyed in on, right? And I've got to get a local opinion on it.
I think the reason that, because now I have more friends who are in-house, and I totally know that perception is just not true at all. And I think the reason for that perception is because of how it happens, right? Because a traditional path is you go grind, right, at a traditional, at a private law firm, and then it's seen as, when you want to take a step back, you go in-house. So that must mean in-house you're doing less work. Rather, no, you're doing the same work just in a different environment. Right. And I think I'm just saying, coming from one of those people who initially is like, do you really work?
No, I hear you. I 100% agree. But like I said, it made sense for me because I understood the training that they had that there was some intentionality behind the training that I was going to be given, the type of deals and the sophistication of deals that I was coming out working on, right? Like we're talking $40 million deals fresh out of law school that I'm shadowing on and eventually serving as first chair on. I don't know where you get that kind of experience, right?
Yeah.
Seeing deals from origination all the way through closing, not just drafting a resolution on a deal or, maybe reviewing a lease, but really taking a deal from the beginning to the end.
The acquisition doc, the operating agreements.
Doing all the drafting. Exactly. So just understanding what the program actually looks like is what I always advise students to do.
So I'm sorry, Kristen, I want to follow up on
go ahead.
you mentioned this term now a couple of times, core values. Understanding what your core values, and you said you relied on your core values in determining where you wanted to be at. What are those core values?
Yeah, so again, did the work to figure those out. Some that really resonate with me would be autonomy, balance in my family, prioritizing my family, being paid based on productivity and fairness, having a boss or an environment that is caring and supportive, but also competitive. People that can be tough on the issues, but kind to people. Those are the kind of things that matter to me the most. And I think that's really what's helped me make decisions throughout my career, whether it was should I stay or should I go, or should I look at this nonprofit organization to serve on? Is it aligned with who I am and what I'm about?
I love those. I think each one resonates with me. Those are very similar to my core values. And frankly, that's what in-house gives you. I was getting ready to say that. So I've worked at 3 different companies, and this company by far operates like closest to private practice.
The company that shall not be named.
Well, no, it could be named. It's named all the time.
The company that shall not be named. It has no name.
It operates so much like a law firm, and I don't think people on the outside looking in know that. How could you know that? But just because I've been in-house at other places, companies don't usually have Westlaw. Like corporations, they go, I don't need Westlaw. I will either the attorneys here know what we're talking about. Also, I worked at international companies, so that's different too.
Yeah.
They know the issues, or we call outside counsel for some of these things. Here, I use Westlaw every single day. I am writing memos. And Larry and I have different jobs, so it's not exactly the same. But
He's practical law.
It's sure practical, and we've had practical law.
I feel like this is like this is some weird endorsement of Westlaw.
No, it's not.
No, Westlaw, your prices are too high.
I love Westlaw.
I like Westlaw for the record.
I did it. I loved it. I loved it in law school too. Like,
come sponsor us, Joe. Get Westlaw to sponsor us. Okay, all right.
But I want to talk about this path too. We were talking about the advice you give to law students, and I remember when I was considering taking a role at my first company, I called Professor Murray, who's always been a great advocate. She's a great human. And I said, hey, I had 2 job offers. And I said, hey, I have this. This is a non-traditional role at the company I had been working at. I had an internship there. Like, they're creating this job for me, but it's not in-house. It's not this law position. And then I have this other role that is a law position at a company I don't really know. It's smaller, so I'm going to have to do some traveling. And she said to me, well, do you like who you work for? I was like, yeah, she's great. Is she an advocate? Yeah. Do you like the company? Do you like the direction that the company is going? I said, yeah, we do cool stuff. She's like, then the choice is very easy. And that's why I chose to go to that company, even though I was worried like I wouldn't get to the ultimate path I wanted, which was in-house. That advice that she gave me was so important. And it's actually something I think about right now. If I'm thinking about a different role, every time I've changed roles, changed companies, I've always thought, do I like the person who's going to be managing me? Do I like the direction of the company? Do those people seem friendly, and does it align with my core values? So that's kind of the advice I usually regurgitate to students who are thinking about a move, but even people who, students who are trying to go straight from law school to in-house. I have to emphasize it's not easy, because some of them think, oh, this is the easiest route. And I'm like, oh, that's such a misperception. Like, I wish we would not have that perception that it's easy.
And now, a word from our sponsors. In these uncertain economic times, the State Bar of Wisconsin wants to make sure that you and your practice have the best available tools. Ultimate Pass and Books Unbound are available for purchase using 6-month installment plans. Contact our customer service team at 1-800-728-7788 for more information.
I think a very important takeaway, if you look at what you both just said, if you consider the fact that law school students and young lawyers and even lawyers mid-stages in their careers, there are always a lot of choices that need to be made. There are always opportunities and things that come up and someone's willing to pay you more. So do I want to switch to this type of law? Well, what I do is currently so stressful. What type of law do I practice? Where do I go practice it at? Where do I want to go practice? Chicago, Milwaukee? And I think the key thing, and I think what's very important from what you both just said, is very early on, lawyers need to develop a prism through which to view these choices. And that prism, or that perspective lens, are your core values. What are your core values? Because if you have that, you can always run the options through them. And sometimes they change, right? Obviously, I would say, I'm assuming your core values were slightly different when you were not when you didn't have a family versus when you did have a family. I'm sorry, I don't know if I said that right, but but rather than tweak your choices, tweak the prism through which you view them, and then just run them through. And I think that's pretty strong.
No, I think that's right. Family has always been at the core of one of my values, right? But you're right, with time and experience in life, it does evolve, but it still stays true to the original value.
And by doing that, you get to be your authentic self, because you're not making choices in a vacuum, right? So obviously in a vacuum, this job's offering more money.
Right.
That makes sense, right? I mean, if you just use an economic, so you're going to go to that job. But if you don't run it through your prism or your core values, you may be making a very, very bad decision, probably one of the worst decisions of your life. So keep the core values forefront.
Absolutely. And if you get nothing else from anything that I've said, my mentor once told me, there is no right path. It's just your path. And that's the one that's really stuck with me the most. You take that sort of state of mind, plus your values, and you're just so clear when you're making decisions.
There is no right path, just your path. I think that's where we're ended at.
That's profound. I love that. I do want to say, just before we get out of here, and I've said it to you in your podcast, Larry, but I'll say it here. I'm so proud of you and all that you've accomplished. I think it's great. You have a great reputation at this company. People think that you are reliable and smart and kind, and you still give back to your community at all times. So you're an excellent representation of Milwaukee and PS of this company. And I love that I kind of had a front seat show to watch you from law school to this company and being a great young lawyer. So I really appreciate all the work that you do within the company and then outside of it. And just thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Dito, I share those sentiments as well. Thank you very much, Larry. I appreciate it.
I think the world of both of you. So just thank you again for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emil Ovbiagele, and we'll catch you next time.